Alrighty. I am late to this tier list. I will acknowledge that right away. We have been on this patch for like 5 weeks now, and it's getting pretty close to the point where it's going to get patched and this is all going to be irrelevant again. But I don't know. We all collectively as a community took a while to figure this patch out because so much changed. Because the game was becoming less and less polarized around just a few options, all of a sudden everyone had to experiment, and we're finding that there are a lot of things that work, which is part of why I think it took us a while to figure it all out. So I might be a little bit slower than most. I think a part of this was that I was in the process of experimenting with my team and seeing what was working for us. But I think I've got a much better feeling about this list because we've had the extra time. So here it is, and you know, if this helps you for a week, then cool. Starting off with the meta-defining tier, this is the tier of weapons that pretty much everything is being played in response to. Anything like that's doing well is doing well in part because it has good answers to these things, or at least isn't beaten up by them quite as hard. So the specials are really the story of this more than anything else. Tacticooler is considered to be basically mandatory on just about every comp at the moment, top level. Like, nobody's not running cooler that we're seeing. And so the N-Zap being one of the best weapons for getting that cooler, and being one of the best well-rounded weapons that can use the cooler but also play supportively and has a bomb. You know, lots of very desirable characteristics going along with the Zap there. There are, you know, some alternative ideas for how to get that cooler. But the Zap is the best, like, all-round, able to use the cooler, plays, you know, a valuable role on the team, gets the cooler quickly, which is a big issue with, say, the Tri-Slosher Nouveau. So it's been the preferred cooler weapon for the majority of cases, but there are definitely some cases where people use something else. So it's up there in meta-defining, but again, you will definitely see a cooler. You may not necessarily see a Zap every single time. You are usually going to see a shot or a squeezer on most teams right now because of Zuka. And often you're seeing double Zuka if there aren't any other specials that the team feels like they need. Because, you know, it's been talked about a lot. Zuka is probably the most powerful special in the game right now if we ignore Tacticooler. It got buffed in a big way with its damage on the last patch, which, honestly, it did not need. It was doing okay. It wasn't, you know, prioritized over other things, but I think with the way that the other specials have been dealt with, I honestly think that Trizuka was going to be okay since there wasn't anything quite as overpowering in the meta anymore as, say, the Crab Tank was. It feels a lot more consistent to get picks with, which is, like, nice for the Zuka players, but it's at times a little bit too consistent. Not even that it's consistent, just that when it does get value, it tends to get an incredible amount of value. More so than most other specials will. Like, no other special in the game can reliably get, like, 2 players down, but there are definitely situations where you can just splat 2 people with a Zuka. It's more power than you generally want a special to have, really, especially in this game, you know. Splatoon 1, Kraken, completely invincible, goes and splats everybody, you know, fine. Everything was busted in that game. You know, in that game, Ink Zuka was arguably significantly better than the Trizuka is in this game, where it had no warning, no sound effect, nothing on the UI. You just had to kind of guess where it was going to be used from and when. So it's not like this is an unprecedentedly broken special. It's just stronger than everything else, and strong to the point where it feels like less of the game is played out with the main weapons than it is with the special weapons. It feels like you can play the game really well, and from a tactical perspective, from a mechanical perspective, and then someone just gets a Zuka and erases all of that. Like, you don't want to give a special so much power that the game starts to revolve around it and how well it is used, as opposed to all of the other skills you're trying to test in the game. And Zuka is just on the not okay side of that line. It's not super bad. Like, there have been way worse specials in the history of Splatoon, but it is our problem at the moment. And toning it down, I think, will do some really good things for the meta. But after that, after those weapons there, we've got a really healthy metagame developing. And I think just some slight nerfs to the Trizuka. And maybe there's a question of what should happen to Tacticooler. I think it's fine where it is right now. It's not super overwhelming, but it does kind of hurt sometimes to feel like you have to devote one slot of your team to running it. I don't know how you balance around that special. It's very unique. It's something that's not really been... Nothing like that has really been in the game, where it accelerates the fights, where it gets people back in quicker. So that's a big question mark in my head and how that works going forward. But talking about the main weapons really quickly, Splattershot it will literally never be a bad weapon. Like, they're never going to make the Splattershot main weapon a bad thing. And it's got a lethal bomb, which is always going to be good for a weapon like this. It allows it to stall, it allows it to poke from longer range than it normally can with its main weapon. It lets it set up traps. It's just a really well-rounded kit, and the fact that it has the best special in the game right now makes it one of the best weapons in the game. And, you've got like the T-Tech right now, which does not have the best special in the game. It's still in the solidly playable tier. If you give a Splattershot a bomb, it's going to be at least that high pretty much all the time. And so this is the special that's elevating it up to that. One thing that I do really like about this weapon is its kill time. That's something that gives it a pretty good ability to contest most things. Obviously, if it's getting outranged, it's in trouble. But generally, things that do faster damage than it does, it can outrange. It has a way to fight just about everything. Very strong fighting weapon, even if it's a little bit on the sluggish side compared to something like an N-Zap, which can dip and dodge around. The kill time helps to make up for it, and like we said, one of the strongest kits in the game. N-Zap, really, really solid. It's able to use its cooler as a frontline weapon, but it's also able to play support or watch flanks. It's able to just sit back and bomb spam. It's able to be your objective player. You can make it do just about anything you want it to do, and it will do it at like at least 80% of the value of pretty much any other weapon that's going to be able to do that thing. So it's not, a perfect weapon by itself. Like N-Zap with a suction bomb and some kind of average special would probably be way down at the bottom of solidly playable. But again, has one of the best specials in the game, so it's up here. And Squeezer is different. Squeezer's not just being elevated by its special. Squeezer, I would put it as it's not shackled anymore. The Squeezer as a main weapon is an absolute monster. It's something that, if it is not chained down by its kit, it will run over the game. We saw this in Splatoon 2 when it had Splat Bomb and Bubble Blower. That was disgusting, because it had the bomb, which is the one thing that the Squeezer kind of wants that it doesn't have from its kit currently. That ability to poke at range, to create control over a space that is delayed, so it can maybe set up traps and things like that. And it had a special that let it push in, which let it go aggressive, making it a weapon that could literally play every single role on your team. So it has a wall, which is chaining it down a little bit, but Zuka used to be a mediocre special and is now one of the best specials in the game, and so we're just seeing tons of Squeezers. And make sure you're doing your hand stretches. That is a good source of hand injuries. And I've done the data on that. So it's like I've been working with a doctor on a video. It's coming up. Like, we will talk about the squeezer in that video, but it's really strong right now. And it's going to be until the special gets nerfed. Next tier, we have very strong complements or answers to the meta. These are the weapons that are not defining the metagame, but that you are tending to see played with what is meta at the moment. And this tier, honestly, might deserve to be bigger, because there are a lot of weapons that have been underexplored, like up until recently, that people are starting to run a lot of. Like, we're starting to see a lot more Kraken, for example, than we had in the past. And that's something which I'm tentatively putting stuff like hereabouts for that, but that could easily jump up higher if more people start jumping onto that bandwagon. But V-Slosher, very, very, very common combo with the above weapons. This is the AoE weapon of choice at the moment for most teams. Your ability to hit up over ledges, and contest things that are above you like that. It also has strikes, which are very situationally useful. Like on tower control, you love to have strikes, so that you can use it as a GG special, kind of end the game with it by just keeping someone off the tower. It's very strong in certain zones maps where it's able to cap a lot of the zone. It's also very good into Crab. Crab has been doing a lot less well than it has in the past, partly because Zuka is so strong and Zuka shreds Crab pretty quickly, but also because strikes are another special that you're likely to see, and that also is pretty nasty into a Crab tank. And so, this weapon is actually a pretty solid Splash-o-matic counter for a lot of reasons. It makes it more difficult to run that weapon since it's so ubiquitous. And it just is a really solid, like, midline fighter. Something that has a little bit of extra range that can kind of stop those frontliners from running in at you, but also is capable of moving up and taking fights and setting up traps with its bombs and doing aggressive things so that you're not losing pace for trying to grab the kind of weapon that can punish a frontliner from running in at you with Tacticooler. Next up, we get to all of the backline options, and I've just kind of dumped them all in one place. If you play Ballpoint, you're probably going to also just pick up the Nouveau for certain situations. So while the Inkjet is probably a lot more common, there are definitely some niches where you want to use the ink vac, and so I've just included them both here. It's like, if you're gonna run one, you might as well pick up both and figure out how they both work and see which maps and modes you like for each, because chances are there are going to be some that you like for each, and I just kind of like to think of them as the same weapon for the purposes of rating them on the tier list. The E-Liter and the rest of the chargers here, they have a bunch of different use cases, but effectively what's going to happen here is you're going to have a charger one trick, and they're going to have all of these things in their repertoire. The E-Liter is probably the most niche of the picks. It's a pick where you're going to run this on certain map modes, but it's going to absolutely destroy everything on those map modes. You run an E-Liter on brine water, it's just a good idea. But then sometimes you might want an ink vac, like maybe you're playing a particular Rainmaker map, and then you pick up the V-Charger. Maybe you want strikes instead, and so you pick up the Z+F. To me, they serve a similar enough function that I would just put them all there. Now, how they fare in their own respective backline matchups is also something to keep in mind. But I don't know. I think that lumping them all there when, you're going to have someone who can kind of just play all of those things, I think that's fine. Now, Snipewriter is one of the odd ones out here. Let's talk specifically about Snipewriter, because Snipewriter is probably the best alternative cooler kit right now to the N-Zap 85. It farms for the cooler very fast. Like, the paint on this thing is not to be underestimated. The range is really good on it, and the fact that it is able to fire 5 shots. Yes, they don't do as much damage. That doesn't change really much about how much paint they put down, though. Charger's already painted decently well, but a charger that can just semi-auto tap off 5 shots, that is going to paint a lot better than the average Charger. And so it's going to be able to get cooler pretty reliably. And then from there, it's going to provide support in the form of poking at the enemy team. It's going to be, setting someone up so that they're one-shot to a lot of different weapons. And that's a really powerful thing to be able to do from a very safe distance. It is going to get bullied out by certain backline matchups. You've got to be really careful, say, around E-leaders. But that's okay, more so than with most backline weapons. Because with most backline weapons, you're there to, control parts of the map to get picks. With this one, you can just farm cooler, and you're still benefiting the team by doing that. So it being forced out of its, losing backline matchups isn't as big of a deal because it's able to fulfill that role in the team, and that makes it so that you can run like 3 aggressive weapons with the Tacticooler here, and that Tacticooler player who would be a frontliner isn't having to stop being a frontliner to play support. They're all just able to go in fairly aggressively if you've got the Snipewriter. And then you've still got the Snipewriter to anchor, to have jumps back to. So it works pretty well with a lot of different ideas for team comps. And it's probably, like I said, the next best cooler option. Nautilus is also doing perfectly fine right now. Any meta that's going to have all of these zippy short-range shooters, Nautilus is going to do well into them because Nautilus is good at eating those. It's got that bit of extra range and that bit of extra DPS that makes it just really, really dangerous to push into. And so, if you're going to have a team running at you with Tacticoolers active, one of your answers is just, well, they're just running at me, let's shoot them. And this is one of the best weapons at shooting people. So it's always going to be pretty valuable. It's a great option if you're trying to do a backlineless comp. Because it can anchor a little bit, it can play a little bit further back, but then when it needs to move forward into aggressive positions, it can use its charge hold mechanic to bring the charge with it and take places that no other Splatling really feels safe taking. So, really solid weapon there, and Inkstorm has never been bad, especially on narrow maps or maps with important choke points. It clears those really, really handily, and it can be a pain in the butt to deal with for someone who's, say, trying to use a Trizuka for them to be able to move around, see through it, that sort of thing. Carbon Deco. I've been keeping Carbon Deco a bit higher on this list than I think most people have been putting it. Part of the reason is that it has Zuka, and so while it's not going to get that many Trizukas, it does have access to the best special in the game right now. And it's also in a meta where there's going to be a lot of paint, and so it's relatively easy to run because you're probably putting it in with like a shot and a zap, and that's going to mean that it's going to have a lot of paint to work with, and it's going to be able to sneak in because it has its teammates supporting it in that way. It does require a lot of support from the team. You're making a really hard commitment by committing to a Carbon Deco on your team, but also what you get back from it is insane slaying power. At top level, a Carbon Deco is just occasionally going to get a quad. It doesn't matter how good the team is you're playing against. Sometimes that's just going to happen if you play around it well. And we've seen that be proven before. So I'm not shifting this until, something major happens to Trizuka probably, because I think this is still a really strong weapon and that people should be considering it if they want to play that ambush playstyle. But then the other option here is the Tri-Nouveau. The Tri-Nouveau is the Tacticooler weapon that you go for when you don't need a ton of Tacticoolers, basically. It's not going to get very many. It's a weapon that's very based on taking trades as a main weapon. And so you kind of have to shift between the two modes of, am I playing support right now, or am I playing aggressively? The N-Zap does this fairly gracefully because being able to, be a shooter that paints a lot and has a pretty good fire rate tends to double as combat utility. But with the Tri, if it's going to paint, it needs to use its fizzy bombs and kind of sit back and play very campy and clog choke points. Basically do things that someone who is picking a Tri-Slosher doesn't have in their mind to do a lot of the time. Because they're here to slosh bucket and get kill. And it's not going to want to do that if it's playing around its cooler. If it wants to get a lot of coolers, then it really needs to be playing a lot more safely than the main weapon would typically want to. And then the difference between it and its other kit is that this one can transition really well between those two ideas, because fizzy bombs allow it to move quickly and also paint a lot, and so it can paint something that it can swim into and use that to get in on people and get into those kind of more ambush roller sort of positions. So it's a little bit awkward in that kind of disconnect between its two playstyles, but because it can do both of those, and it can be a source of cooler for the team, if you're trying to go really aggro, then this can definitely be an option for getting that AoE damage in that you're not going to get if you're not going to run like a Slosher and have a cooler in the process, so you can check multiple boxes that your team needs in one kit. So that brings us to solidly playable tier. This is the biggest tier on the tier list because I think that there are a lot of things that can work right now. There are a lot of things that you don't really need to build an entire team comp around that can just kind of slot into certain places. It gives you a lot of options to work with, which is cool. You can bring pretty much whatever special you want. It'll be on something that's worth playing, which is super cool. There are all sorts of different classes here represented. We've got Chargers, we've got Brellas, we've got Splatanas, we've got Blasters, we've got Dualies. Like, there's something for everybody to play here. You've got the Stringer up there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But really, really healthy place for the metagame to be. Now, nerfing Trizuka is invariably going to have some additional effects to it that go beyond just bringing those weapons down. And that'll always have an impact that, you know, the butterfly effect is just difficult to predict. But if, you know, the Zuka were just a little bit weaker right now, I feel like this would be one of the best metagames that any Splatoon game has ever seen. It's already pretty close to that, and I'm pretty happy for it. So let's get into these. 52 Gal. Whale is one of the lowest priorities in the game right now for people, but the combination of Splash Wall plus this main weapon is so strong that I still think that it's totally playable, and the Whale synergizes pretty well with it. The thing is, Squeezer is similar enough in that it's a longer than short range shooter that has a splash wall that you probably don't want to be running both of them at the same time. And given the opportunity to choose one or the other, you're probably just going to choose the Squeezer. So it does feel in a lot of ways outclassed, even though it's doing a pretty different thing. You know, this is a frontline shooter. And so maybe there is sometimes a use case for it, but double splash wall is definitely a questionable call for a team. So usually you're probably going to run this with shots instead if you're going to run it at all. But it plays really well with cooler, and there are some map modes that I still prefer it for because using the wall just makes it so difficult for someone to get me out of the way. You approach a 52 the wrong way, it absolutely can 1v2 your team. So still a very dangerous option, and I'm still putting it up there. I think I'm probably honestly underrating Stamper by putting it here. This is one of those weapons that's like, you really need to one-trick this thing if you are going to get the best results you can out of it. But you can absolutely one-trick this thing, and I'm going to go so far as to say I don't think that there will ever be a meta where this particular kit is lower than high tier. Right now, Zipcaster is not doing super well. It's just not getting quite as much attention at top level, and so people aren't tending to go towards this, but this is the best Zipcaster user in the game. It takes Zipcaster to a level that most other weapons cannot because of the additional range that you get while not sacrificing the short-range fighting power that it has. It's one of the most disruptive things that can dive into the backline of any team. And a well-played Stamper is just brutal in terms of the matchup spread against most of the weapons of the game. Because anything that kills faster than it, it can generally outrange, and anything that outranges it only outranges it by so much. But it still has a really consistent combo that's relatively quick to kill from that range. And it can just kind of poke and use cover and lock down whole areas of the map, or charge forward at someone and go for those quick picks by, as soon as it gets a charge slash, following up with one of the easier follow-ups on a damage combo in the game. So, very, very strong. And if, there are some people who say that this weapon will never not be top 5. And I think that it's definitely nothing to sleep on, even if we're not seeing as much of it. One of the things about it is that it's hard. Like I said, you really want to be one-tricking this thing. And so if you're just trying to pick it up and splash it into your team comp, I feel like that's a lot less likely to work unless you've already got a ton of experience on it. Next up, we've got the Wiper Deco. This and the REEF-LUX are the two options that I would consider for missiles right now. People might feel a little odd that I'm putting REEF-LUX this high, and I'm a little bit skeptical of it on my own as well. But we've been running it on my team recently and been seeing some success on it, and it's been seeing more attention, particularly in Turf War, which is understandable. But that attention that's been getting from Turf War has been getting people to experiment with it a bit more. We'll get to that when we get to it. But Wiper Deco is still the traditional missiles pick, and it's nice because it comes packaged with the additional utility of beacons, which those synergize so well with Tacticooler. With Tacticooler, the whole goal is get people back into the fight as quickly as you can and keep the fight going. Your goal is to turn a 4v4 into a 4v6 because the first 2 people that go down are back in the fight before the next 2 people go down. And you can do that even better with beacons. So pop the missiles to start things off, run everybody forward with the Tacticooler buff, jump them back into the beacons if they go down. That's a really winning setup for a fight. And since, Tacticooler is so ubiquitous, it's just a really good combination with what's currently in the metagame, especially given that there are a lot of shots running around who are really going to benefit from having the missiles and being able to set up traps with the missiles with their bombs or their Zookas, and that they're just going to want to run in, which is something that missiles allows you to do. So, pretty solid addition to a team there. Range Blaster has been seeing a little bit more love recently. There was a big Japanese tournament recently that was won by a Range Blaster. And I've just been seeing more people running it in general in a competitive level. It's working really well because it can take pretty safe angles, but still poke around those angles. And it's a strong matchup against something like a shot, I think, something like a short-range shooter. Get a little bit more range, get to that mid-range with like the Nautilus, and you're going to have a better matchup against those short-range shooters they're going to try and run at you. You do have to be very careful because it's not the most mobile weapon in the game, and that makes it relatively vulnerable to things like bombs or specials being thrown at like Trizukas. So you need to play your angles. You need to play over the top of ledges. You need to conceal where you are. Use stealth. But the thing is, it splats fast enough once it gets into a favorable position that a lot of the time there's just no response to it. And so you're just like, well, I got hit once, therefore I am down now. And the Range Blaster gets to go, hee, I win. Splash is probably as low on the tier list as it has ever been. It's, been on kind of a steady decline since the days of, crab meta. But here, there are just so many specials in the game right now that counter it. Zuka is really popular, it shreds Crab Tank. Inkjet's really popular, it shreds Crab Tank. Tri-Strike's really popular, it shreds Crab Tank. Just the top tier weapons right now, the ones that everyone are running, make it hard to use the Crab in an impactful way. That's not to say that, Crab is weaker in terms of what it can do when it's in position. It is still an insanely powerful both offensive and defensive weapon. Just, it gets pushed out of position the way that another backliner does now. You start throwing things at the Crab, and now it really does have to move. And now there are often enough threats that you can maybe get in and flank it or something. So it's a lot less of the powerhouse that it used to be. And you really need a game plan when you're running a Crab for how to keep it safe and what positions to take so that you're not only going to get value out of the Crab, but also keep it safe. In my experience, that happens infrequently enough, especially when you get to higher levels, that it's just a really situational weapon. It's something that you don't want to just run everywhere. It's something you want to run for particular map modes or against particular teams. Tetras really haven't been the same since Machine got nerfed, because one of its big niches in the meta was to run the machines down. And so now that that's not really a fixture of the metagame anymore, it's not as popular. But it's still, powerful for diving the enemy team because it's got all of that mobility. Just, you dodge roll as a Tetras toward a Splattershot, and it is my personal belief that the Splattershot wins that 1v1, and Splattershot is really common right now. The Splattershot is a much faster kill time. It only needs 3 shots, and it still has a very fast fire rate. So the Tetras, they kind of need to pre-damage the player or kite them or something. And what you do to a Tetras is you either kill it really quickly or you just ignore it and let it roll off into its corner and go do other things and then wait for it to try and come back at you. Because it's got pretty long range, but it needs to really be using that range to get picks. Either that or it needs to be throwing someone's aim off with the dodge rolls, because otherwise it can't really make up for the slower kill time than a lot of the other short-range options. So I find that right now Tetras are just kind of dying a lot and not getting as much done as they used to. So it's a little bit harder for them. And Reef Slider is, still not in a great state at all. So it's not a bad option, and someone who's good with these is always going to be valuable on a team. But it's a weapon that you kind of need to, again, one-trick a bit, and it's a weapon that you need to build your team comp around. So really high commitment, and you only start really seeing the benefits of it once someone's really, really competent on it. The Brellas here, I think a Brella main would probably put these in somewhat different tiers, but I haven't seen enough of the Sorella Brella to know exactly how high it should go. I don't think it's probably up a tier from here. This is probably about the highest I feel comfortable putting it. The Zuka tent might be a little bit higher. I've seen some people putting it a little bit up from here. Because, again, Zuka, and Tent is finally a functional main weapon. It's something that really can demand a lot of attention, and there are a lot of choke points in this game that it is going to be able to abuse. So when there's a Tent on the map, it's commanding attention again, and it's also a hiding Zuka player ready to pop the Zuka from a place that you didn't even see because you couldn't see the visual cue. It was behind the Brella canopy. Then the other one has Vac, and I think most of the time you're probably going to run the Zuka kit, but sometimes you want an Ink Vac instead. And if you want that Ink Vac, then this is a source of that Ink Vac, and so people might run it for that reason. Same kind of idea is why the Ballpoint Nouveau is where it is. The V-Tri, some people are putting this lower. I still think Inkjet is powerful enough that it's worth having. The main weapon is really strong in particular maps where you can hit up over the tops of ledges and things like that. And sometimes, you even like the Toxic Mist. Like running this on something like Humpback Rainmaker, one of the best Inkjet maps in the game, that also has a major choke point you can seal off with the Toxic Mist. That's really nice. I actually really like having that weapon on that map. So there are definitely a lot of ways that you can work this into a comp. Most of the time, I imagine you're probably going to be running the Tri-Nouveau, and I do put it a tier lower than the Tri-Nouveau, both for its mobility and for the fact that Tacticooler, it being there, checking off that box for your team, frees up the rest of your team to be doing a lot more things. And the vanilla Tri isn't going to get as many Inkjets as you would probably like. There are other Inkjet weapons, or if you're trying to run an Inkjet specifically, probably better to go with them because they'll actually get it more than twice in a match. Speaking of Inkjet weapons, we've got the Rapid Deco. Rapid Deco is really good with poking at those backline weapons that you're worried about from a distance. I think one of the reasons blasters might be doing well here is that even though they're not super high mobility, the ones that have a bit of range are able to poke with their AoE damage at someone, and if someone tries to Zuka them, they can be already partway behind the cover because they shot their shot in a way that the AoE is what's hitting you, not the line of sight. So they can break line of sight pretty easily. That's my guess. Inkjet is still a really strong special, and while you're not going to get a lot of like picks out of just locked on torpedoes, you will certainly get a lot of information out of it that can be really valuable in, say, finding where someone is hiding, sharking, gonna fire a Zuka, something like that. So I think that's still a pretty solid choice right now. Both of the jets have been seeing use, and so I'm just putting them together in a pair here. One has rain, which is really nice for the paint coverage and for the area denial. And then one, if you want to make a set play out of an ink vac, this is one of the better weapons to do it with because it's going to get those vacs very quickly with the amount that it paints. The Charger has more of an impact as a main weapon in terms of fighting, and so I'd probably choose one of those given, the choice. But there are a lot of situations where a jet fits in better to a team, or someone's going to be more skilled on it, hasn't put in all of the hours they need to be a crack shot on a Charger. And that's a pretty good way to get that ink vac too. 96 Deco is one of your best Kraken options right now. Kraken is pretty favored at the moment among a lot of high-level teams. We're seeing it used to a significant enough degree that I don't want to consider it just a fluke right now. And it's not just a Clamblitz thing, although it is definitely very popular on Clamblitz. You put a Kraken underneath the basket, there's no way to stop that jump from going in. Now, again, that play is a bit gimmicky. It's something that's more of a GG Tri-Strike sort of idea for tower control than a strategy you should base your whole game plan around. But being able to do that is really powerful, and people have started to show value that they're able to get from it by just kind of playing sheepdog and shepherding the enemy team around, using that Kraken to threaten them into the places where their team wants them to be. So I think that this is generally a solid option, and that I wouldn't be surprised seeing it in most places. The Rapid Pro Deco, Whale is not super popular at the moment, which is the biggest reason that we're not seeing a ton of this, but its range for having an AoE weapon is absolutely nuts, and the fact that it has a sub-weapon that combos with it almost sort of a little bit redeems that sub-weapon. Not really, but kind of, a little bit, maybe, sort of. And the information that it gets from that isn't bad either. The custom Dualie Squelchers, it's a bit of an awkward sort of niche for it to be in right now, where chumps are not super strong, its main weapon isn't super strong, but it has beacons, it can play off of both of the parts of its kit extremely well. It's good for kind of comps that want to stall and play the attrition game, and just make it gradually more difficult to hold the space that they're holding and kind of move forward that way. It's not a very fast weapon, but if it's able to kind of get set up, it can be a real pain in the butt as it moves in on one side. So the Wiper is not doing as well as it used to. Part of the reason is just we're not seeing a lot of value put on Hammer at the moment. Hammer just hasn't received quite enough to be something that people want to rely on when they have an aggressive special like the Zuka. The Zuka is kind of taking over the role that the Hammer was in. It's just as disruptive. It's significantly more safe. You're a lot less likely to kind of expose your flank to someone while you're using it. And it's over faster, so you can go back to doing what you're doing or farming another one. It's also less committal. It doesn't require you to throw yourself into the enemy team. So, Wiper's just been seeing a little bit less use for that reason. You're a lot more likely, I think, right now to see the Wiper Deco, but it can still do the things that it used to do. The Heavy Deco is, again, another Kraken option. and similar discussion to be had about the 96 deco there. This gets a little bit more competition with the other Splatlings. Like, it's hard to look at this and to look at all the other good Splatlings around you. You've got your Ballpoint, you've got your Ballpoint Nouveau, you've got your other heavy kit, you've got your heavy edit. All of those are also options, and so we're not seeing a ton of it just because of that. But this is probably the one that I think I've seen the most out of the heavies, including the heavy edit there, even though it's not really a heavy Splatling. I think that speaks to the value of Kraken right now. It also synergizes pretty well with it, where the Kraken can allow it to get up into positions that it wants to hold without having to worry about being shot off of there. The heavy edit, on one hand, it gets cooler, and that's really powerful. And, cooler on a backline weapon, that's really, really great. You can be the anchor, drop the cooler on their jumps as they're coming back in after a fight, and they've got it immediately. Like, there's a lot of value in that. The problem with the heavy edit that I think is keeping it from going any higher right now is that it does not have an answer to a long-range weapon at all. If there's an E-liter in the game, it is very difficult for this weapon to do anything about that E-liter. It really needs to just cower when it's got a longer-ranged weapon looking at it. It's not super long-ranged by itself. It's kind of closer to the Nautilus than it is most other things. And it has a curling bomb. Curling bomb you can't use to displace an E-liter the vast majority of the time. You can use it to clear lanes in front of you. It's not necessarily a bad thing when you're trying to help your team push in. And it really benefits from its own cooler and getting its mobility and being able to walk around. This is a scary thing to fight against as a shorter ranged weapon, but any Splatling is a scary thing to fight as a shorter ranged weapon. What the Splatlings have routinely been bullied by is stuff like the Chargers. And this just doesn't have very much of an answer to the Chargers. It doesn't have quite the same range. It doesn't have anything it can poke with. Its special isn't doing anything to move them out of the way. It is purely dependent on the rest of its team to shift one of those kinds of things out of the way. And that's a very serious weakness for it that doesn't make me comfortable putting it any higher than this. V-Heavy, it's got Wavebreaker, which has become more and more kind of mid as time has gone on. It's not that it's gotten any worse, just there are a lot of other specials that you kind of prefer that have gotten better. So it feels harder and harder to run, but it's still, a very solid kit. It does all of the things it used to do. The main weapon is fine. REEF-LUX. So REEF-LUX is higher than I think most people will put it. I mentioned before that my team has been experimenting with this, and we've been finding some success. This weapon can play a lot more aggressively than it used to be able to because of the way that the shot spread now works. The fact that you're able to condense the shots a little bit more makes it a lot more likely you hit one shots, which allows it to take more aggressive positions and be a bit more of a factor in fights than it used to be. Because of that, it now has the ability to fight well enough that I look at it more as a K-shot than I look at it as like an arrow spray. This is a weapon that can farm for special, but also fight. It's not just a weapon that's going to farm for special and be useless everywhere else. And it's on the low end of that. It's still not the best fighter, but it's doing well enough at that. I've seen it played well enough, and we're seeing some successful results at top level, even if just in turf war. That makes me look at it like, yeah, I think this thing actually has some legs. It's not, breaking the game anytime soon. It would need to fight significantly better to be able to do that. But having missiles helps so much when you're a short-range shooter trying to run in with Tacticooler. My goodness. This builds into the meta comps pretty darn well. I have enjoyed having that missile support on the teams that I've been playing on, and I want to see people experimenting with this in addition to the Wiper Deco a little bit more. 96. V96 has never been this high on the tier list, but VAC is solid now, and with people already making a slot for the 96 Deco in a lot of comps, if there's a map they don't want Kraken on, maybe they want a VAC, and if they want a VAC, they can run a very similar team comp, and that player can flex onto this. So we've seen this used in a number of different places recently, and it's gotten some value. Sprinklers still nothing to write home about. And, you know, there are some problems with the 96 for sure. It's fire rate. Fire rate is just a big problem for any of the slow firing weapons in general across the board. And it doesn't have the best paint output without the sprinkler, but it's definitely enough to make do. And, you know, like we said, lack of paint output, sprinkler can make up for that a little bit. So it's definitely not one of the worst sprinkler weapons either. T-Tech, I might have put this down a little bit low. The thing is, if you're running a T-Tech, the question that it's immediately going to run through your mind is, okay, but why not a Splattershot or a Vanilla Slosher? The Vanilla Slosher has exactly the same kit. The Splattershot has exactly the same main weapon. And so it feels a little bit outclassed in most cases. It can be a good source of strikes if you really need your shooter to be the one who's putting those strikes out. If you were to try and run double strikes, then it's one of the best options to put on your team for that. But those are pretty niche situations, and I'm trying to think why you would want to do one of those things, unless what's happening is that you are limited to some degree by the weapon pools of the players on your team. And for the sake of a tier list, that's not something I'm going to consider all that much. Because we have run T-Tech a number of times on my team. But again, it was more a matter of we didn't have someone who wanted to run the others, who knew how to run the others. If I'm just getting to pick whoever I want to be on the team and I get to choose what it is that they're specializing in, T-Tech is probably not one of those things. Machine is hard to judge because there are so many machine players who are so good with it, and this kit synergizes so well. It's still fine. It's just hard to say how fine it is because people spent like the whole first year of this game playing this weapon. So now that it's not as strong anymore, is it just that we have a bunch of machine players who are still capable of playing machine and that's why it's working as well as it is? Should I be dropping it down a little lower? Or is it that the main weapon has actually been nerfed so hard that it deserves to go further down than that? It's difficult for me to judge, but kit, again, totally viable, totally strong. The fizzy bombs are really, really good, and the combo with the main weapon is really good. Booyah is never going to be a bad special. The problem is the ink efficiency and the slowness are definitely holding it back at this point. When you have a midline weapon like a Squeezer that outranges this, but also has a faster kill time and gets a better special, like, it feels hard to put in there unless you're like, well, we've got a player who only plays buckets. But here's the thing, if they play buckets, they also have the V-Slosher available, which is able to move up faster and play at the pace of a tacticalered up team a little bit better. We see machines tend to come back in metas where zoning is more valuable, where you're trying to put something in someone's way and stuff up the choke points. But the metagame right now is go fast, and machine is not the fastest of weapons. That was why the Tetra Dualies were brought in, because it was fast enough that it could outspeed them and beat them that way. But at the moment, that's not what the metagame is favoring, and so it's fallen a little bit further down. Neo Splash, I feel like the aggressive potential of having the Splat Bomb on the T-Tech has been worth more historically to me than having the Suction Bomb. Because you can play very supportive with this thing, but one of the advantages of the best support weapons that you've always had, like your K-Shots, your N-Zap 85s in multiple games, was that they were also capable of taking fights really well when you needed them to. And having that short of a range with a 4-shot is just a little bit worse, especially if it's not going to be comboed with the faster acting bomb like the Splat Bomb. So, I don't know. I personally think I'd probably prefer a T-Tech most of the time, but that's not always been a popular opinion, and it's very close. It's almost the same weapon. So, Squiffer is purely, if you're a god with a main weapon, then it can kill pretty much anything that you want it to kill, and that makes it an asset to the team. that is about all that's making it an asset to the team. It's going to be able to spot things with the point sensor, so it can shoot them at the main weapon. It's going to be able to put up a bubble, so it can use the main weapon for more safety. A lot of it is just, can you hit a lot of shots with the Squiffer? The entire kit depends on you being able to do that. Your team depends on you being able to do that. If you can't do that, do not pick this weapon. If you can do that at a very high level, then this weapon can be strong and compete with pretty much anything. Like Tetra Dualies, Zipcaster has, again, been somewhat out of favor. And so it's seeing less play than its variants, even though Reef Slider is nothing to write home about either. At least the Dark Tetras have a bomb. But if you're playing Tetras, you're probably going to learn how to play both. And if there's a niche for the Zipcaster, go for it. V-Dualies is something that has been seeing use in Japan and that other people have been looking into as a result. And it's not bad. I just don't get it. I don't get what it is about this that makes it so much more preferable to other options for things that you're trying to do. Like, the use case seems niche enough that it feels like something that shouldn't be something that people main so much as something that people splash onto for, no pun intended, for particular reasons at a given point in time. That's one where I'm like, I don't know that I can justify it. I think the Suction Bomb is good, but it's a mismatch. Because for one thing, it eats a lot of the ink tank. For another thing, it's slower acting than something like the Burst Bomb or the Splat Bomb that you could give it. And it being able to act fast would be huge for comboing into the Crab Tank. If it could throw a Splat Bomb and then pop a Crab Tank, that's value. If it can throw a Burst Bomb and then pop a Crab Tank the way that the Splash can, you just get so much more out of the Crab Tank for it. You basically turn your Crab Tank into a first shot of Trizuka followed by 8 more seconds of being able to hold the map. And that's value that the Splash gets out of the Crab Tank that the V-Dualies never will. So if you're going for a Crab Tank, it just feels like you go Splash, because you're not sacrificing that much in the way of aggressive power. Yes, the Dualies can dodge roll through enemy ink, but the Splash paints so fast, and its lightweight movement speed lets it go so quick, that it can kind of get through okay without it. Like, it feels like it compensates better for those weaknesses than the V-Dualie does for its. So, there are still people who are going to use it. Maybe they want the extra range. Maybe they want the ability to dive with some other weapon. There are definitely some use cases. It's just, I've been thinking about this for some time because I've played Dualies before. And then every time I try to pick these things up, I just feel like I don't have a reason to want this over Splash. Neo Machine. Neo Machine it's borderline for me. It's almost down a tier. Down kind of 2 tiers, because the tier below is niche tier. And I wouldn't say this is so much niche as it is, I'm just not sure that I want to put it in solidly playable versus wouldn't be shocked to see it. It does have Zuka, and that's kind of carrying the kit, because as a main weapon, it would really like something it can combo with, and it doesn't have that in the point sensor. The point sensor is fine in that it lets you hit shots on people that you can't see, which is something that this weapon with an arc is capable of using. But as soon as it gets pushed by something, it's in trouble, and at least the vanilla machine, which already had trouble being pushed by things like Tetra Dualies, at least it has a fizzy bomb it can use to zone people out. This doesn't have a way to keep people off it that other weapons do. It really depends on using the main weapon to pull that off, and the main weapon does not have that much range. So you only have so much of a window of opportunity to keep someone off you before they're starting to do DPS, and it just feels really unsafe to me. Next tier down is weapons where I'm like, there are some cases where I want to put this a tier up and some cases I want to put it a tier down. So Brush is a weapon that works pretty well on some maps that let you have good flank routes. Like I'm thinking Scorch maps where you play the bridge and you try to run over by brushing and you get in there very quickly. That's awesome because in all of those kinds of cases, it lets you use the killer whale to kind of envelop the team, throw a bunch of bombs, make it difficult for them to stand, and then flank them. But some maps in this game just don't allow the flanks very well, and you really need to build a team around this weapon. So that combination of things where you need to build the team around this weapon, but also you're not going to be able to use this weapon every time, so you have to build an entirely different team for something else. It feels like the sort of thing you would only want to do if you have a weapon specialist who's specifically a brush player. Otherwise, I don't see a reason really to want to run it, just because of the amount of effort that goes into trying to make it work. For that effort not to go towards every single map mode you can play. Explo, there are some zones maps where this thing still works because it just paints like a beast and it's really good at comboing up with other people's chip damage. But it also does kind of get run down sometimes. There are some backline weapons that bully it out of position, so it can be really hard to play it into every situation. It's something that you can absolutely splash and have in your weapon pool, but that you don't want to be solo maining. And then Bloblobber Deco, if you want a Kraken and you have someone who's like looking to play this kind of weird midline anchor hybrid, like I could see this being something you want to use. It's just like, how do you fit this thing into a team comp sometimes? It's capable of playing a little bit more aggressively than the other blob. It has some features to it, and we've been seeing it see some use. Some top players have been, swearing by this thing. It's also just got a lot of the same weaknesses that the main kit has. So sometimes I'm like, this doesn't feel good when I watch even strong players play it. And then other times I'm like, yeah, that's working, I guess. You can use that as your Kraken option. So I'm undecided about it, so it's here. All right. So now we get towards the bottom half. Anything up above here is like, I could see this being played by top level players. It's probably not all of them are going to happen very often at top level, but I could see these being run at top level. The ones down here, it's like, I wouldn't be shocked to see it, but I also wouldn't be asking for it if I were on one of those teams. This would be like, they're running that. Okay. I mean, that's fine, right? Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at on those. And my reaction gets progressively more incredulous as we go further down this list. So Flingza, again, I've kept saying this for a lot of times now, but this is a weapon that I look at it and I'm like, how is it not good? How are people not running this thing? It just seems really strong, and yet nobody wants it. It might be competition for the backline slot. It might be that something like a Stamper is better at the kind of zoning that it wants to do, and that if you're trying to play it for ambush, you've got this. But it's good at a lot of different things, and it gets missiles. It's like, man, I don't get it. It still seems like something that should be higher up, but that is just getting no use, and that has to mean something. Inkline Tri-Stringer. This is generous, I feel. Tri-Stringer has not been doing especially well. It's the combination of really, really high... it has a skill ceiling that's basically the same as a Charger, where it's going to have about the same range as a scoped Charger, and it's got the same one-shot potential, but you have to aim better. So it's harder, but still does the same thing. And it has super chumps, which is like, that's not bad for it, but you've also got like an Ink Vac and a Tri-Strike and Tacticooler that you could be getting out of this player. And if you put it up against something like a Charger and you don't hit your one-shot, it has the threat to one-shot you. Or even a Splatling. If you don't one-shot it, it has the threat to laser you down before it's going to do sufficient damage to splat. So it's really aim dependent for a weapon that honestly, if it were as aim dependent as just like a charger, it would probably still not be as good. So it's not like you can't use it, and it does have some use cases that the chargers do not, in that it can, arc its shots. It can deal chip damage that chargers can't, but also, like, why deal chip damage if you could just splat them? The big swig, VAC is better than it's ever been, which is why I'm putting it up this high. This might be a little bit high even in this tier, but it's going to be able to get VAC pretty reliably. It's going to be able to put up walls. It's going to be like, and it's good at tanking aggression. It's not good at eating aggression necessarily, because if this gets rushed down, it's still a relatively weak main weapon in terms of kill time and everything. It has some situations that it can win thanks to the buffs, but not very many of them, and not against a lot of weapons. So I could see someone bringing this out if they really just needed ink vac as a part of their strategy, and that's about it. The S-Blast has been abandoned by its king, its monarch Chara, and it may never recover from that. It might need a buff. Reef Slider itself has been pretty weak, so I would like that we try to buff Reef Slider first before we try to look at the main weapon. But it's just not been seeing very much use recently. If you're looking for a blaster, you've got the longer range blasters up here that are doing better, like the range or something. And there are even shorter range blasters that have better kits. You would be playing it for the main weapon pretty purely, because you've got this guy. You've also even got this guy, which sees some use. So I can't say too much more because I haven't really messed with it myself to be able to say what it does uniquely in like this current meta with Zookas and everything. I just haven't seen very much of it at all. Mini Splatling, main weapon's fine, hammer not in the greatest place, and I wouldn't really see someone wanting to use this unless it's a situation where their team has a Splatling player and they want to put that Splatling player on something more aggressive or supportive, and that player can't play Nautilus very well. And that's a situation that you're probably only going to see at like low to mid-level competitive play, because at a certain point, like a Splatling player is probably just going to learn how to play Nautilus and Ballpoint, and then be able to do a lot of the things that you're kind of trying to do with an aggressive mini. It does paint better than those weapons do. It's painting for hammer, which is not super high value right now. Speaking of hammer, L3D, again, hammer's not doing super hot right now. The L3 has not been a great main weapon so far in this game. People have been much preferring the reliable fire rate and damage of something like the shots. So even though it's got that longer range, people tend not to want to put up with the fact that they have to hit 2 shots out of 3-shot bursts. That's just unreliable enough that even the burst bomb that it gets to combo with it isn't doing enough. V-Blaster, people are experimenting at the moment with using Big Bubbler as an answer to Trizuka, just trying to put up the bubble shield to stall out the bombardment. And so this is a little bit higher up than I would probably have put it otherwise, because people have been trying that out. I guess if I'm putting it up for that reason, I should probably put the Junior up with it. We'll get to the Junior. I honestly still think it's down here. We'll talk about that. Do I think it's down there? And we'll pick it up here. Okay. So that strategy seems kind of dubious to me, the Big Bubbler, because you're sacrificing an entire special to counteract that kind of value. You could also just, use your own Trizuka, for example, or have a Tacticooler that's bringing people back in after they go down, and that could have equal or even greater value depending on how the Trizuka goes. So I think, having such a reactive idea with the Big Bubbler isn't great unless you're using it in some situation like tower on the tower or splat zones for in front of the zone. It could still see some use for those reasons, though. Junior, the big problem with this one, honestly, is just the main weapon's ability to fight for itself. Because it's a short-range shooter with high movement speed, with a splat bomb. Like, those are all very good things. And if you can overlook just the big bubbler problem for some reason, you find any reason to run it, it seems like something that should work. But the problem is the range. It just gets outranged by all of these short-range shooters that are in the meta right now. It's so hard for this thing to fight a shot, to fight a zap, to fight anything even longer ranged that can get their aim on well. If it can make them miss effectively, yeah, sure, but that's not something that you can really expect to do into top level. And so that's why I'm like hesitant to even put it up this high. The accuracy and the range just are not quite good enough. And that's one of the reasons that we'll talk about the Dapples here, because it's got a similar problem. The Dapples don't even have the accuracy problem. It's one of the fastest splatting weapons in the game, and it has a dash that's basically a teleport. The problem is, again, range is really important in this game, and you don't want to be going much lower than a Splash-o-matic under pretty much any circumstances, because otherwise it's too easy for even very fast splatting weapons, like your shots, your 52s, your Nautilus, for crying out loud, Squeezer. Like, even a Tri-Slosher can kite something like a Junior or a Dapples pretty easily in a lot of situations. And being kited sucks. Being kited is never where you want to be. You do not ever want a situation where your opponent can hit you and you can't hit them, especially if they splat as fast as something like a Splattershot does. So getting any lower range, like I said, than that Splash puts these in a lot of danger. And that is one of the bigger weaknesses of the Splash itself. So that's why, despite having all that kill power, this one's down here, and despite having the Tacticooler. One other thing about the range is that range in this game is not just a combat factor, it's also a factor in whether you get Tacticooler faster. It's a factor in how fast you paint the map and how much you farm your special. The Zap with significantly higher painting range is going to get significantly more Tacticoolers. So even if you're trying to use this weapon as a support, it's going to support a lot worse than the N-Zap will. So that's typically why people are picking it for its, despite its stronger, despite the fact that the Dapples has a stronger fight capability once it's in range than the Zap does, typically people are taking the Zap instead because it's better rounded in all of those other areas, and it makes up for the lack of kill time with its range to a significant degree. The Dynamos. One of these gets Tacticooler, and that's awesome. And that's something that the team can genuinely use. The other one gets Super Chumps, which is kind of okay a little bit. Neither of them are great, but there are some maps where we're seeing them played. We're seeing stuff like Humpback actually bring a Dynamo because you can hit up over the top of that dome and make it difficult for your opponents to know where you are before you swing and then immediately splat them with that swing. That's something that the Dynamo needs. It needs a way that it can jack in the box you, that it can jump out, and all of a sudden, because a Dynamo does not miss, you are just splatted. And there's nothing you can do unless you can splat it before the flick comes out. Which is a pretty tight time window for a lot of weapons, to have the reaction time to notice it's there, turn to it, start firing the weapon, and hit your shots. That's pretty intensive if you're able to sneak up on anybody. So it can be a lot more dangerous on maps like that, and it can cover a lot of space. It's just really slow and easy to dislodge. It is Trizuka food. You throw bombs at this thing, and it doesn't get to swing. There are a lot of problems with the main weapon because it's so slow. Like, nothing with frame data that good is likely to be a top tier in just, like, most games. It did very well in Splatoon 1, but there are significant weaknesses that it didn't have there, plus also a lot of other kits that are also strong right now that are keeping it down. Anova is a inkjet option if you want a lot of inkjets. It's going to get slightly more inkjets than the Ballpoint, but the Ballpoint is really, really good at fighting and is one of the top tier weapons in the game right now and fits into a lot of comps really well. So there doesn't feel to be that much reason to use it. You've got these other options that also have much more capable main weapons at fighting and have other things that they do. So it's like you can use this as a paint support, but you know what everyone's using as a paint support right now? It's the N-Zap 85. So there doesn't feel like there's too much of a need to use one of these things, to use a weapon slot just to get slightly more inkjets. Glooga Dualies. Glooga Dualies can work as a skirmisher, kind of, sort of, a little bit. They have significant weaknesses as a weapon in terms of ink efficiency, in terms of their ability to put down a certain amount of paint. They're kind of slow. They're pretty good at holding an area when they get hold of that area because they have the wall. They're a mid-ranged weapon that kills relatively quickly if they hit their shots. That's a big if, and that's one of the problems with the weapon. It's consistency. This is not like a beam that you can aim at someone. This is maybe like it feels like a semi-automatic in terms of its fire rate. It's not super fast. And so it can be difficult to actually track for long enough to hit all of your shots because there's so much of a gap in between each shot. But it's got the same kit that the Kensa 52 Gal used to. It can hold its ground. It's just not as good at pushing in as the Kensa 52 Gal used to be. And for that kind of playstyle, you've already got this, and you've especially already got this, which is going to shove it down even further. You know, mid-range wall weapon? Well, we've already got this guy. And this one is just going to have a little bit more difficulty putting paint on the ground. And it's, I believe, got a little bit less range. So the trade-off usually isn't there. But I also wouldn't be surprised to see it because there are definitely some niche use cases where, yeah, that totally works there. Bamboo is something that my team ran for a long time. And then one day we were like, hey, Esper, try running Snipewriter. And we started winning more. And so we were like, oh, well, let's run it on these maps then. And then we tried Snipewriter on more maps. And we were winning more on those maps too. And we were like, huh, maybe we should just play Snipewriter. And that's what we do now. I've played with the Bamboo, and it's like, it's good at zoning at mid-range, which is exactly what it was good at in Splatoon 2. Obviously, it doesn't have the MPU that it had in Splatoon 2 that made it a little bit more dangerous in certain niche situations. I don't think the MPU is as big of a deal for the Bamboo as a lot of people made it out to be. I think that the main weapon itself was about that strong, you know, give or take a few percentage points at most. But the kit doesn't really back this weapon up super well. The Killer Whale is just not a priority right now. It's one of the least desired specials in the game. And the Autobomb, I guess, is kind of nice for information, but it's not giving it that much extra anything. It's not in great shape right now. And it gets kind of overpowered by longer ranged weapons or by weapons that can rush it down or flank it or something. And so that's just a lot of things that you have to be building your team to be able to protect it from for the value of, I don't know, something that you could be getting out of like a Nautilus or something. So I wouldn't be surprised to ever see it. You know, there are definitely top level teams that have pulled it out from time to time. It's just, it always feels like, okay, but why not this other thing? Dualie Squelchers. Dualie Squelchers have a problem with ink efficiency a little bit. You probably don't want to use your bombs too much, which makes it really hard because you like bombs, but you can't really use them too much. And Wavebreaker is a lot weaker than it used to be just because other specials are kind of in favor right now. It feels like other specials have gotten a little bit of power creep. There's just been a lot of buffs recently to other specials. And Wavebreaker has yet to get one of those. So maybe it's just feeling a little bit weaker because other things have gotten better and it hasn't. But it's doing fine. Just, you know, it was never a high tier to begin with, and it feels less like one as time goes on. Okay, the Octo Brushes. I mean, Red Shell likes them somewhat. I don't know, man. Like, when you have like one single person in the West who runs it, it's kind of hard to make a good judgment on this. You know, Red Shell has been someone who's a champion of the weapon, who says that they're totally playable, and Red Shell would probably put them up here somewhere. It's just, there's not a lot of data, and, you know, I don't hear great things about it from other people, too. Right now, with Zipcaster being where it is, I would say I should probably be putting it like this, where you want this one a little bit more, probably. It's not that Zipcaster doesn't synergize with the weapon, it's just people have not been preferring it. Maybe they've been getting zooped, or maybe it's just that the weapons in the game right now don't get disrupted as much by it. I haven't been having to fight a lot of Zipcasters. If I have been, they've been coming from Stampers, which are dangerous for other reasons. It feels like I have a little bit of a blind spot for Zipcaster because I don't play any of those weapons, and I'm also not a backliner, so I'm not the target of those weapons very often. Zipcaster did get its buff, and that's awesome, but it also, again, has been played less in the metagame because it's not as much of a priority anymore. So, man, I don't know. We'll put them about there and call it a day, because this again, not a weapon that I'm super familiar with, and I'd hear opinions in a range pretty much anywhere from here to here, I think. Zinc Mini, big bubbler again. If it makes a comeback, then this weapon's going to be, you know, one of the weapons that's in consideration for it. If I'm going to put, you know, those weapons there, I should put Mini up ahead of it, I think. I would say Mini is probably my bet for what the better bubbler option is out of these guys right now. I wouldn't consider Squiffer to be a bubbler option in that I don't think it's going to be playing for the bubbler specifically. It's not a support weapon so much as these guys are. And so that's, you know, if we're playing it for the bubbler, then I'd say we run this. If we're playing it for the main weapon, I'd say we play this. You know, that's the thinking there. Hydra, it's really difficult for the Hydra right now because there's so many Zookas. Anytime that there is something in the meta that's massively disruptive to a backline, that's always going to be more of a problem for the Hydra than most other weapons because it's slower than most other weapons. You know, even the E-Liter, which is also a heavyweight weapon, at least the E-Liter can put down a really solid line of paint for itself in one tap shot and then swim through that the whole way. Whereas the Hydra has to put down multiple shots, and to do that it has to get charged first, and then it uses its slow swim speed to get through it. And if it, you know, messes up that line at all, now it hits a blip and now it's stuck. So the slowness of the weapon hurts it in specifically situations like this, where you're going to be blasting it from far away with a lot of these kinds of specials. Zap 89 is going to be a phenomenal kit once Super Chump enters the meta. And until then, it's going to be very mid, because this is a Chump support. So if they make those OP, N-Zap 89 immediately skyrocketing on the tier list. But up until that point, this guy gets Tacticooler. Big Swig Express is solid at farming rain and pretty much nothing else. There's nothing else that you would do with this weapon than like farm the rain, and maybe it gives you a little bit of AoE damage, but it's only going to be poking for so much of that. It's not going to be super reliable at getting picks, so I don't see too much of a reason to run it. But, you know, if you want a lot of rains, it's a way to get a lot of rains. So, you know, I wouldn't be shocked to see it just because someone wanted that. So next, we have Would Raise an Eyebrow. I'm not outright looking at this comp and saying it's doomed because one of these weapons are on it. But I'm also thinking, why are you doing this and not something else? It feels like in a situation like this, where one of these weapons is being run, we've got a player who's weapon pool is a little over centralized on certain things, because there are alternatives that are similar, that are going to be more effective, and that those players could be trying to learn instead. So these have a game plan, these have something that they can do, but also why would you do that? So Bloblobber, it's kind of a weird support backline hybrid, which doesn't really make up for the fact that you don't have a backline, but also isn't so overpowering in terms of paint that it's any answer to this kind of thing that's getting tacticaler for doing all of that painting. Its damage is really inconsistent. You either need to hit like all 4 shots, or you need someone else chipping away with you. And in that case, why not just like run a squeezer that'll just splat someone from that kind of range? I don't see a lot of a reason to run it. That's not to say that if I have one on the team, I'm like, this is a guaranteed L. You can absolutely play around the blob and, make up for it. It's just like, why would you want to make someone do that, given, the variety of other ideas available? Forge Pro is, like, again, the best weapon that's never going to see any play. It's a shooter with a solid kill time, a little bit on the slow side, but, like, it's only a 3-shot, which is valuable, especially at earlier levels when the amount of shots you need to splat someone matters a bit more than the fire rate in some cases. And it's got a lethal bomb, which is solid. It's got Booyah Bomb. Nobody's going to complain about Booyah Bomb. It has some ink efficiency problems, and that's one of the biggest reasons why it's not seeing a lot of use. But also, like Squeezer, it has more range. It also 3 shots. I believe it has pretty much exactly the same time to splat. And it also paints better. And it gets the best special in the game. So why? There might be like very weird niche situations where you'd run it, but I don't... It just feels like there's usually a better alternative. Rapid Pro, you probably run this Rapid Pro. This Rapid Pro, it doesn't get a lot out of the ink vac because it doesn't want to be that close to things. Now, ink vac is better than it ever was before, so maybe I'm putting this down too low. Yeah, you know what? I think I am putting this down too low. I'll put it up to at least here. We have seen some use from this thing, just because of vac being better. I'll put it here. It might be higher. It might deserve this kind of thing. It doesn't have the damage combo, which is one big advantage that this one has. And I think there are better vac users for sure, ones that are going to get it more reliably. And so it's definitely not... It doesn't feel super strong to me. We haven't been seeing like a ton of it. But I think it also has some use. So I'll bump it up out of this. Now this guy I'm not going to be quite so kind to. Its kit's a little bit too slow for it. If you're going to run Tri-Strikes on a midline weapon that has AoE, you've got this guy right here. And this guy has bombs it can combo with that will help the Tri-Strikes actually do something. This weapon really does not. It only gets the 3 strikes. It does not get a bomb that's going to do anything to someone that you're striking. And the mines are just really underwhelming on it, I think. So... not enough value that you're getting out of the kits to make up for any of the weaknesses of the Rapid Blaster. I think this is solidly down here. Dreadringer, we've given this a shot on the team, and I've seen a lot of people trying it out. The fact that you can hit the 2 sloshes to paint more is nice, and it would be so much nicer if it got a special that really mattered. Reef Slider is a huge kind of dead part of a kit, dead part of a comp. And you don't really want that very much in a meta where you're already devoting one of your weapons to Tacticooler. So if you're putting a Reef Slider on a team, you're making it so that there are only so many specials you're going to be able to use to push the enemy team back reliably. So the main weapon doesn't really make up for that. Main weapon is okay. Like, it's definitely usable. Just the kit that they gave it is a little bit on the weak side, and I don't think that we're going to see too much use out of it until it gets another kit. Unless they make big buffs to Reef Slider, which I don't even know. They've even tried buffing Reef Slider recently, and it's still in the state that it's in. Might be a fundamental problem, might need some reworks or something, I don't know. H3, I'm bumping it up a little bit because it has Tacticooler, and Tacticooler is valuable right now, but like, why would you run this instead of a lot of the Tacticooler options we have up here? I don't know why. It's like, yeah, if you're, an H3 player from a long time ago and, you just want to get back to that and have a good special to use it with, sure. But, like, you don't need to. You've got, much easier things to run that are still going to paint as well, if not better. It just doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere near as much value out of this as you are out of the other options. So, Tri-Stringer, we've talked about the main issues with the main weapon of the Tri-Stringer, where it just feels really outclassed compared to other top-tier weapons that are used as in the back line. Again, your ability to hit up over ledges and stuff is definitely nothing to sneeze at, and the fact that you can chip damage people, the fact that you can do AoE damage as a backliner is definitely valuable. Just, it's not going to get splats as often as the other damage that you can do as a backliner with the other weapons. I just think that it's a lot less reliable in the getting people splatted department. If the game were about doing actual DPS, doing raw damage, then this would probably be one of the best backline weapons because it would reliably do 60 damage or something to people. But in this game, 60 damage doesn't splat someone, and they heal it up very quickly, and so it very quickly gets eaten and doesn't matter. The arrow spray, if you're gonna farm a whole bunch of Reef Sliders, this is your weapon. Why are you doing that? It does paint a lot, and being able to paint a lot and then being able to have a Fizzy Bomb to help keep people out of a choke point or something while you're painting a lot, that's sort of valuable. That's the sort of thing that a Splattershot Jr. does, where it paints a whole bunch and then throws bombs. And if it does get right on top of someone, it has a very fast kill time. But that's right on top of someone. That's Dapple Dualies range at least. Because it's such an inaccurate weapon, which is part of why it paints so well. So, if you're trying to go a raw paint support playstyle, you can go for this. It's just, you're not getting anywhere near as much out of that as you would be out of a weapon that can also fight for itself. As soon as someone challenges this, it's kind of tissue paper, unless it's got a really smart Reef Slider planned, or it's able to keep you back with Fizzy Bombs. The Sploosh is a very odd weapon. It demands a very particular kind of team comp to play around it. It needs other frontliners, because in order for it to do its thing, it needs people to be distracted looking someplace else. And it needs so much stealth, so much speed. It's very odd, and Hammer is not doing as well as it used to be. So it doesn't fit super well into the metagame. It's very demanding of its team to set up for it. There are a lot of problems. But when it gets into position, it can sometimes sort of do things. When a Carbon Deco gets into position, it can get a quad. Sploosh, being able to kind of sort of do things, is not, to my eye, worth the investment at the moment. Kensel Luna Blaster. Chara looks at this as kind of an alternative to the S-Blast that might even be better. I think that the fact that there's a long-range mode on the S-Blast is definitely still valuable, although the kit on this is undeniably better. Having a Fizzy Bomb, again, that might be something that puts it a little bit further up there. It's definitely going to paint more, and that paint is going to be more valuable because you're going to be throwing it not to some random area on the map, but you're going to be throwing it at an opposing player and trying to paint their feet with it and deal damage that you can combo off with. It's just the Luna Blaster itself as a main weapon is very weak. It doesn't have a lot of range, and it can't move very quickly. So getting close enough to someone to do damage is a mistake on the opponent's part too much of the time. Same kind of issue with the short-range rollers here that are not the carbon. This guy at least can poke with burst bombs and do damage that way. And if you leave it alone for too long, it just sharks with a Zuka and then splats you that way. These guys do actually need to get up close, and being able to do that against a team is, again, a fault of the team that's letting you do that to them. Because you're not going to paint very well for yourself. Your team needs to be doing that for you. Even on the carbon deco, that's the case. If the other team is not painting defensively when they know one of these kinds of weapons is in play, then they're kind of screwing up. At least this weapon can make you respect it from a distance. These ones, I mean, this one you can kind of poke in with curling bombs and try to, trick people that way. And that can take up their time, but the curling bomb is so expensive right now that they can kind of just afford to check every one of them, and you're using up so much more of your ink tank than they are checking your curling bombs that it's not really actually a reasonable way to get you in. The only way that helps is if they get distracted by something else, and then you get to swim in through that thing they didn't check. And it gets Big Bubbler, which, it's doing a little bit better, again, because we've been trying to use it against Trizukas, but you're not going to get very many of them, so you can't really rely on that being your team strategy. Also, you're not going to be in a position where your team is going to be able to use the bubble. You're usually going to be in a position where only you want to be using the bubble. It's usually going to be a selfish option. So given that the Trizukas aren't just going to be randomly guessing a bunch of spots to fire at anyway, they're more of a threat to the rest of your team and the rest of your team falling down than they are to directly hit you. I don't see this one, being a game changer anytime soon. The reason that I put this guy up higher is that it's got a little bit more utility for the team. It's got beacons, which can help the team get back in, and it's also got the Kraken, which can shepherd players on the enemy team in certain directions. This one's got the better mobility, and so I'm not really sure which of the two I really prefer. I put them kind of on the same level right now. Slosher Deco is a great main weapon with a kit that's just not doing super hot right now. If we get line marker up to a level that's consistent with the other bombs and stuff, then we take another look. If Zipcaster is back in vogue, it's still got a lot of steep competition. It's still got to beat out the Stamper. It's still got to beat out the Tetra Dualies. It's still got to beat out the Octobrush. There are definitely other weapons that are better choices for Zipcaster than it, but it exists, and, it might do better if those things are buffed. I've just not been impressed with Paintbrush so far. I have not seen it used to a level that feels like it's doing something that other weapons can't do that's valuable. It's got a pretty decent amount of, AoE damage, which you could get from any number of different other weapons, like your sloshers, your range blasters. Sure, the range and spread is a little bit different, but it's also so slow. The startup time on the swing is just brutal. It makes the weapon really hard to use reactively at all. You kind of just need to know where someone is and have the jump on them in order for that to be a fast enough kill time. It always feels like a mistake when I die to one of these. It always feels like I screwed up with my positioning or something, and not that they were able to use the strength of their weapon to force me into a bad position. The Pro here is one of the weakest crab weapons in the game, because it's not going to get that many of them, and, we've talked about all the weaknesses of the main weapon over here. And it has line marker, which is not going to set up for very much either. You can kind of try and use it to combo with the crab if you, are good at hitting your directs with the line marker. That's about the most you can hope for. The Dapples, we talked about the Dapples up above here. This has a much better supportive kit. It has a kit that is going to do something at least for the rest of its team, whereas this is a very selfish kit. And given that the main weapon is relatively weak, as we talked about, as like a frontline fighter, because it needs to get so close to things, being selfish in this case, not necessarily helping it, especially when Reef Slider is often going to put it in more danger instead of less. Now we're getting it raise both eyebrows. Like, you are running that weapon? Why? These are weapons that are not going to see competitive use anytime soon, as far as I can tell. It would take really, really major buffs to some part of this kit, the likes of which Nintendo has been pretty loath to do, before we see these in competitive play. The H3, very slow, very inconsistent damage. The kit isn't helping its damage at all. It's only putting up walls, and keeping yourself alive doesn't make that big of a difference if you're not moving the enemy team somewhere, if you're not splatting the enemy team. That's just really hard to do with the main weapon. There are other midline weapons that are much more reliable at doing stuff like that. So you generally just are not seeing very much of this. If, like, you're a god at the main weapon, let's look at this like we're looking at the Squiffer. If you're a god at this main weapon, then yeah, sometimes you hit some one-shots, but, like, the Nautilus splats pretty darn quickly, too. So you could almost get pretty much the same sort of kill time with the one as the other, but then the kit for this isn't doing very much for you, whereas this has an Ink Storm, which is a really powerful zoning special. And this is a lot more mobile because of its ability to charge hold, as long as its team is painting for it. Whereas this has to wait for a full 3-shot burst on the floor just to be able to paint its feet. Like the Nautilus as a Splatling is actually faster moving than this thing is. And the Nautilus, has a displacement special on it. So yeah, there's just not a lot going for this kit right now. The main weapons might need another look. Ink Brush Nouveau, Hammer, like we said, not doing great right now. There are other brush kits that are all better. And I really don't see a reason why you'd prefer the Ink Mines over what the others have. GooTuber, if you're running it for torpedo missiles. And I don't think that's enough of a reason to run a weapon. You already have this guy and this guy, which are solid missiles options. You even have this, which I still think is fairly solid as well. So you have options that are going to get those missiles pretty quickly. The torpedo is a little bit of aggression, but at top level, it's just going to get shot down. So you're relying on yourself being able to play the main weapon to some significant effect. Squiffer is going to be better for the short range, and then the long range, you're always going to be better with one of these. The charge time is really slow. The gimmick of it being able to move with that charge is not as valuable as it is with something like the Nautilus. Because you already have a certain amount of charge hold on just the vanilla charger, or the unscoped chargers in general. So why sacrifice all that range when you could get almost exactly the same value that you get from this? It tends not to really do that much for you, and so there's not much of a reason to use it over the other chargers. It's a very slow weapon, and the only part of the kit that's really going to get you much is the missiles, which you can get from other options that also do other things. Opening Gambit makes this weapon funny, but not good. If you're going to run Opening Gambit, you might as well just run it on something like your main Slayer weapons. Opening Gambit really, to me, is a power move. It's you saying, I think I can get so many splats on this weapon that I can maintain the Opening Gambit just by outskilling you. Opening Gambit is something that, personally, I think only, Melon should be running. Only, if you are a player who just knows you are better than everyone else in the room, if you are one of the best players on Earth, if you're someone who's cracked a 4K X power, then yeah, Opening Gambit actually makes some strategic sense, because it's going to make you even better at overpowering people, and you're not going to run the risk of losing it because you're just always going to be overpowering people. But it feels like a rich get richer kind of thing. It's kind of like Respawn Punisher. I've seen people run Respawn Punisher for very similar reasons on top-level Japanese teams. And doing that on this thing, like, it's going to be easier to keep the opening gambit on this thing. But what are you getting out of opening gambit? You can move a little faster, and you've still got a Splattershot Nova. You've still got a 5-shot weapon with terrible aim RNG. I would much rather have someone run like Splattershot Pro than this thing, especially for getting Whale, which is, you know, it's got synergy in the sense that you can track people with that, but that utility is not worth as much as just being able to splat someone. C Jr. might be a little on the low side, but it's just so underwhelming right now. Torpedoes are just going to get shot out of the sky. The special is doing less than it has relative to the other specials, just because those other specials have been getting stronger. And the main weapon is just really short range and hard to get in with. The aim spread isn't helping it either. So no one part of the kit is particularly strong, except for its ability to paint. But you can get the ability to paint from other weapons that are capable of painting and fighting very, very well, especially now that like the shot buffs and zap buffs have happened that have fixed their aim RNG so you can aim better. It's just worse and worse relative to the rest of the pack right now. And while it's always going to be a popular pick at like early levels of competitive play, where it's relatively passive, you can just throw a bunch of torpedoes and paint for special, and between the torpedoes and the special, players at a certain skill level are mechanically going to have a hard time dealing with that. That does have a pretty hard cutoff at a certain point where it's going to stop working. And at that point, you need to learn the fundamentals of the game, at which point I'm like, okay, well, then just start by learning a weapon that teaches you the fundamentals of the game, that's actually going to be able to continue and be stronger later on. L3 is, you know, we've talked about the problems that the main weapons of the H3s and the L3s have, where they're relatively slow moving. It's hard for them to paint their own feet. This one has a curling bomb to help you paint your feet. Great! That does nothing else for it. And moving forward quickly is not what this weapon was ever really going to be good at doing. Is too slow. Just because the heavy edit has a curling bomb doesn't mean it's a fast weapon, right? It helps it paint its feet and get itself out of some situations better. But it costs a lot of the ink tank, so you're not reliably going to have that every single time that you need to move. And when you do need to shoot your feet, it's a 3-shot burst that you need to fire before you can do that. And a 3-shot burst is a long time. It's also going to take a long time to splat someone because you need to hit at least 2 shots of 2 different 3-shot bursts to splat someone with this main weapon. Without anything to combo with that, without like the burst bomb, this is significantly worse. And the fact that it gets Crab Tank doesn't make up for that, especially since Crab Tank right now is not doing super well for itself. You'd much prefer to have the Splash, which is capable of moving around a lot more and is able to get the Burst Bomb combo off from a Crab Tank, than something that's got a little bit more main weapon range that's still going to paint about the same amount. Range does matter, but if that's the only advantage that the weapon has over something that's faster and better at using its special, and has better chip damage potential and better ability to poke at things from long range. You know, it doesn't even really have better range since this has a burst bomb. Some people would argue no. So definitely really weak right now, not something I would recommend. Luna Blaster, I've talked about the main weapons problems. Too slow, can't paint for itself super well, not enough range for all of those problems to be coalesced into one weapon. Also, Zipcaster has fallen out of favor a bit. Does have a bomb, which is nice, but I've never really felt super strongly about the Luna Blasters as a main weapon in general. Carbon Roller, you have Carbon Deco. It is right here. It has a Burst Bomb, which is an ability to poke and an ability to combo the damage with the main weapon, which makes its kill time significantly faster. It also has the best special in the game right now, whereas this one has Zipcaster, which, like we've been mentioning, has not been seeing as much use recently. So I don't know why you would use this over a Stamper. I don't know why you would use this over a Carbon Deco. It's just really solidly outclassed. I don't even see many cases where you would use it over an Octobrush. The Neo Sploosh is like the Sploosh, except worse at doing what the Sploosh does, and it can be more supportive in that it can, you know, run out and put out beacons and just try to paint the map instead. But with its short range, it's going to run out of ways that it can stay out there on the map before it gets challenged and pushed out. It doesn't have the curling bomb to run away with, and on top of that, the special that it's farming for is weaker. So, not really much to do there. Gold Arrow. Gold Arrow is there to farm Booyah Bombs, which is a pretty slow special to farm because it takes some time to charge and time to throw before you get another one. And it is incapable of doing other things. It does, unlike the Silver, it doesn't have a fizzy that it can throw at someone to kind of keep them spaced out. This thing is made of tissue paper. It just doesn't have a way to keep itself safe until it has a Booyah Bomb. And then it's, going to be in armor for a little while. It's going to be able to throw the Booyah, and then it's going to have to run away again. It gives up space like crazy. And having a Booyah Bomb a little bit more often than a typical weapon will does not make up for that. Clash Blaster. This has one of the best kits in the game and is still one of the worst weapons in the game. Splat Bomb and Zuka is a great aggressive kit, and it does have some niche use cases in its ability to play around cover. When a Clash Blaster takes cover, that does not mean it's afraid. That means it's set up. And you do have to play against it in a different way. But just because you have to play against it in a different way doesn't mean that it's strong, because this thing doesn't have great mobility at all. Its paint is alarmingly inconsistent considering how weak its range and its damage is. It needs to direct you twice as a blaster to be able to splat you. And even though it has a faster fire rate, that's still really slow. And that's if you direct twice. There are other weapons that can splat you faster than its double direct, but directing twice is a hard thing to do. And if you hit any indirect damage, that's going to take so much longer. So very weak main weapon that brings the kit down. Okay, after this, I need another eyebrow from somebody else to raise at the kits. Like, why are you running this in a competitive context? If you're running it for fun, cool. If you're running it because you just want to see how well you can do with the weapon, I get it. This is not a list about which are the funnest weapons in the game, because that is subjective and a silly thing to make a video about. But in a competitive context, these are just really, really substantially weak. I don't want to have a custom GooTuber on my team. Hammer does not synergize with that thing at all, and also is pretty weak right now, and the GooTuber main weapon has always been weak. This one has missiles, and it's still down this low. Nah. The Clash Blaster, all the weaknesses we just talked about, but take away the good kit. Now we've got a curling bomb, so now it can swim forward a little faster. That's taking up a lot of its ink tank and not doing anything really in the way of damage most of the time. Like, if this gets in on you, oh no, there's a Clash Blaster that's in on me. You know what a Splattershot does when a Clash Blaster gets on top of it? It just shoots the Clash Blaster, because it's got a faster kill time than the Clash Blaster does. Like, it's not scared of the Clash Blaster getting in, so that's not really that much of a threat. The Undercover Umbrella is really, really pitiful damage, and it needs a little bit better damage or something, because its shield is going to get shredded way too quickly for it to really get in and do a ton of damage unless you seriously mess up your positioning. It's too easy to play around this, because when as soon as the Umbrella shield goes out, it's so committed and exposed, and it's committed in a way that it can't back up because that shield's going to shred. What it has to do is kind of play this careful dance where it gets you to shoot at it for just long enough that someone on its team is able to get in, and there's other skirmishers in the game that can hold their own for a lot longer than that. Plus, it gets Reef Slider and mines. Mines are, people are like, well, mines are good on it. It can drop the mine and then back up. And you can do that with any other bomb. And that bomb will be lethal and will actually give you a way out instead of just annoying the other player who's chasing you. You can tank that mine and still splat the Umbrella sometimes. So, yeah, definitely not something to pick. And then this Splat Umbrella here, the kit is very slow, and it's a weapon that needs to be kind of forcing its way forward in a way that, like, the stuff that it has isn't going to mesh super well with it. Because we've got Umbrella that's up here, right? And A frontline weapon is going to be underneath walls a lot so that it can use this inkjet and use it pretty well, and it's going to have a lethal bomb to use. Sprinkler's not doing an awful lot for you there. Sprinkler is going to be better for weapons that are pressured less often, and that, you know, maybe you can drop it at your feet and use it as a shield occasionally, but a weapon like the Heavy can drop it and use it as a shield and use that time to get charged and then actually do lethal damage back. The damage on this is slow enough that if you spend the time dropping a Sprinkler at your feet, then you might just get shot in that time and not gain anything for it. And then Tri-Strikes make you pretty immobile, and at a range that you want to be, you know, getting your shield shot at as the Brella, Tri-Strikes are not going to be safe. So it's a really clumsy kit that lands it pretty low down, even though this one's working pretty well. This might be a little bit too cruel to it. It's kind of been in this bottom tier for a long time, in part because of the Brella bugs that have been making the shield not work, but I still don't believe in it too much. I wouldn't put it much higher than like a tier or maybe 2 if the main weapon is considerably better than I'm aware of. Whew. Tier list. It done. Thank you for watching, and click on my links below, and I'm thirsty. I'm gonna go get water.